In the world of basketball, you win by scoring more points than the other team. And as a result of that, on a very basic conceptual level, one might think that the best scorers in the world are going to be the ones that are out there each and every night for your team, consistently in the rotation. But in reality and in practice, it is a lot more complicated than that, a lot more nuanced. And oftentimes, some of the best scorers in the entire league are the ones that are fighting for a spot in the rotation. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and today we are talking about why some of the most talented, best scorers in the NBA do not pan out at the highest level. To begin with this, we do have to kind of get a grip of what the game of basketball is and how a game is won. As I talked about in the introduction, with basketball and in most team sports, aside from, golf, you're going to win by scoring more than the other team. Whether it's football where you put your offense out there to go out there and score a touchdown and then the defense is trying to stop the other team from answering, or in soccer where the scoring is a lot more rare game by game, but that makes every shot on goal even more exciting and valuable. And in the NBA, once again, you're going to win by scoring more than the other team. But there is a distinct difference between the roles of players in the NBA compared to something like football or soccer. Because in the NFL and in every major soccer league across the world, there are defined positions. And those positions are for both defense and offense. In the NFL, you've got your offensive players like the quarterback, the wide receiver, the running back, and so forth. And then on defense, you've got the safeties and the linemen and the edge rushers and linebackers. And in soccer, you've got the goalkeepers, you've got the center backs. And then on the other end, on the offensive side, you've got people like the strikers. And these positions don't ask you to do a lot on the other end of the court or the field. You're pretty set in your role. You're either there to score or at least contribute to scoring, or you're there to stop the other team. But there is one position in soccer that differentiates from the rest in that it plays on both ends in offense and defense, and that is where we can get an idea of how the NBA is played. And that is the midfielder, which is asked to do a little bit of both. They're going to play some defense, typically not go as far back as the center backs or the left backs. And on offense, they're going to set up the strikers more often than not. And they arguably run more than anyone else on that field because they have to play both ends. And because they were required to play on both sides, their value as a midfielder is based on how well they can keep up and perform on both ends at a high level. Because otherwise, you're going to be relegated to another position. If you're only good on offense and you're a net negative on defense, they might just put you out as a striker or a forward, and vice versa on defense. And in the NBA, it's pretty similar. There are only 5 players on a given team on the court at any time, and they have to play both offense and defense. They have to run across the court each and every possession to be in the best positions on both offense and defense. And here's what makes it even more taxing to play both ends than it does in soccer. Because as I mentioned, if you're a midfielder that's no good on defense and just an offensive weapon, they might put you up front as a forward or a wing or a striker. It's not that simple in basketball. They can't just give you a position and say, hey, you're only going to play this side of the court from now on. You're only going to be playing on the offensive end. You can't do that. As a basketball player, you are required to play both ends and be with your team on every possession, whether it's on defense or on offense. And as a result of that, you need to be more well rounded than just a scorer. We'll focus on the defensive aspect here first because that's what we've been talking about so far. That's been our first major point, is having to play both ends, having to play defense as well. You can score 30 points. You can average 20 a night. But if on the other end you go back on defense and the player guarding goes out and just blows by you to match that point, all of a sudden it's kind of empty stats because you might score 20 points, but you might allow 30. And then you're a detriment to your team, and all of a sudden your plus minus might be in the negatives and your team gets outscored while you're on the court. one player that I would like to highlight here is D'Angelo Russell. He is, when given a green light, while he can be inconsistent, when he is on and given the keys to a team, he can be one of the best offensive engines in the entire NBA. But the issue with D'Angelo Russell, ever since he came into the league back in 2015, is that he is a detrimental defender, absolutely detrimental to your team. Because as much as he might give you on offense, he's going to give it right back on defense. And there are solid moments from him where he gets a steal, or back in Minnesota, he actually had a really nice chase down block, but they are very far and few in between. And more often than not, he might lose focus or lose his man and not have a quick enough step to get back in position, and he allows some points. And D'Lo is actually a good point to bring me into my second topic here about why pure scorers and bucket getters don't always make it, and that is the fact that you can get by as a bad defender, as a negative defender, if you have the offensive game to match that. And D'Lo has all the talent in the world to do so, but he is very inconsistent. And unlike, we'll make a soccer reference here again. Unlike in soccer, where the midfielder might get plenty of assists, or even the wings might get a lot of assists, passing it to the middle to the striker. In the NBA, quite a lot of the time, you're going to be asked to both score and play make for others, especially if you're a bad defender, because that means you're going to be required to do more of an offensive load if you're going to really carve out a role for yourself in the NBA. Because if you're going to the basket every play, or you're pulling up from three every play, teams are going to know to defend that and to double you. And as a result, if you're a good scorer, you need to be able to use your gravity and the attention that you draw from the defense to allow defenders to kind of try to key in on you and then be able to take advantage of that as an offensive player. To be able to draw a double team from the defense and find an open man in the corner. Because if you've got two defenders on you, that means there's going to be one defender who's off of his man because you were perceived as the primary scoring threat. And so if you're able to play make for others and toss a nice assist over to them, that counts just as much as you scoring in your own right. It's no coincidence that some of the better scorers in playmakers in the league are intertwined. Guys like Trae Young, Nikola Jokic, even LeBron James. These are all guys who are going to attract a lot of attention from the defense because of all of their offensive capabilities. And so whether you double team them, if you double team them, they're going to find the open man. They have some of the best vision in the league. And if you don't double team them, there's a high likelihood that they're going to score. And as a result of that, even if you're not a great defender, like these guys are not, LeBron was once upon a time, and Jokic is a solid defender, but Trae Young is certainly not, although he has improved in some facets. And LeBron, as he's gotten older, has just slowed down a little bit, and that's natural. That is okay. But these guys aren't great defenders, but they're able to get away with it because they are dynamic on offense. They are not just a scorer, they are not just a passer. They intertwine both to become the best offensive engines that they can be. And that brings us to really the answer to our question about why some of the best scorers in the NBA don't make it to the next level on the biggest stages, whether it's in the playoffs or even trying to get in and be a starter in the NBA. And that's because oftentimes when we look at pure scorers, they can be too one dimensional. We just discussed how you can carve out a role on defense or carve out a role doing a little bit of everything on offense. But for a player such as Bones Highland, who is struggling to get minutes with the Clippers right now, or Cole Anthony, who's having the worst season of his career yet, you look at these two guys, they're not plus defenders. And for guards who are going to have the ball in their hands a lot, they're not the best at playmaking for others either. And they are small, score first guards. And defenses can kind of key in on that. And if they double Cole or if they double Bones Highland, I love these two guys, by the way. These are some of my favorite players in the league. But if they double team them, there's a good chance they're getting stopped. They don't have too great a vision, and that's because they trained so long to become the best scorers that they can be. But as a result of that, as a result of having all this confidence that they can get through a defense, have some great handles, and get by them and score a bucket. When you're playing against some of the best defenders in the NBA, especially on the perimeter, a guy like Drew Holiday, Derek White, even Dennis Schroeder, I think is real underrated. When you're playing against guys like that, they're not always going to fall for your bag work. And when that happens, a truly great offensive engine is going to find the other man. But these guys have been scored for so long, whether it was growing up, they had the green light because they recruited the most talented player on their youth team, or even in college, where teams can see their potential and decide, hey, this is going to be the guy that we're going to kind of let take hold of this offense. All of a sudden in the NBA, you don't have that liberty anymore unless you're an elite scorer like a Kobe, like a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like a Michael Jordan. You don't have that kind of leeway. And since you don't have that kind of leeway, since you're not an elite scorer that's going to make every tough shot, you're going to have to find a way to carve out a role in not just the offense, but the defense to really stay in the rotation. Because otherwise, teams are going to look at you as a ball dominant guard who has tunnel vision and is going to take some dumb shots and be inconsistent and a net negative to the team overall. Now, is that entirely fair? No. Microwave scores in a role can be good. We've really seen the breakout of Norman Powell this year, for example. But in general, that role is not going to be a guy that's playing 35 minutes a night. Teams would rather have more two-way players that can play both defense and offense really effectively, or even just more dynamic offensive players who are going to be able to find shots for others well and have a second chance if something breaks down and their shots aren't falling. But for someone who was trained all their life and been given the green light all their life, that can be a rough transition. And that's why sometimes these guys don't develop into being more dynamic offensive players despite their talent. They are just stuck as being scorers because that's what they've been all their life. And it worked for them all their life, but now you're playing alongside the best players in the world, but also against the best players in the world. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. And when it doesn't work out, the NBA is a business, and teams are going to decide more often than not that they're going to give other guys a chance that they believe are going to be more winning players and give them the best chances to win on any given night. And they don't view that as the on ball dominant player that's going to always want the ball in his hands to seek his shot first. They don't view it as that guy very often, unless you're one of the best in the world at doing so, one of the best of all time at doing so. You're not always going to be given that green light. But to counter all this, because this has been somewhat negative so far, it's been a critical analysis for sure. But I'm not a big fan of negativity, especially because that is something that is in media so often nowadays. It's all the negative headlines, all the tearing people down. So now let's spin it into a positive. And these players, they might not be 35 minutes a game starters, but there is one role where they can certainly thrive if given the opportunity. And sometimes they aren't for the reasons I've just talked about for 12 minutes now. Teams just don't think that they're worth having and putting out there for a lack of defense and not having a super dynamic offensive game. But sometimes franchises are going to need someone who can come off the bench and be a spark plug, someone that can chip in 12, 15 points a night, who might not do a lot else, but on that second unit, they don't have to do as much. They just need to spark that offense and create something out of nothing. And that is where these uber talented scorers can really come in and become microwave scorers off the bench. Some of the best six men of all time fit into this role, like a Lou Williams, for example, or even in recent years, a guy like Jordan Clarkson. Because the worst part about not being a dynamic two-way player or dynamic offensive player is the fact that when you're a starter, that can be detrimental to your team because they can get more out of that starting spot. But coming off the bench, these are guys who are going to be less developed, maybe less experienced, or maybe they're on the decline of their NBA careers. And sometimes you just need someone to get the job done and set the tone for the rest of the team. Maybe the starting five had a slow start, or maybe the other team is playing real good defense, and they just need someone who is going to be able to go out there and exploit the defense and create shots for themselves. And that is where some of the most talented NBA players, most talented scorers can really thrive is in a six-man role, being a spark plug off the bench. If there is any positive to be had for this archetype of player, it is that they can be some of the most exciting players to watch. I mentioned earlier that Bones Highland and Cole Anthony are some of my favorite players in the entire league, and this is why. We see it with other guys like Norman Powell, Jordan Clarkson. While they might not be the guy that you can trust to start each and every game, they might be volatile in that role. There is a spot for them. And so often they don't pan out because teams don't realize that and they view the negatives of the player as being detrimental to their ability in the NBA as a whole. But if given the opportunity, they can be some of the best spark plugs and offensive engines in the world, just on a little bit more limited of a role. Because they're always going to have their flaws. They might not be able to play make for others the best. They might not be the best defenders. They might be a little bit inefficient, but they can go out there and get a bucket when you ask them to. And that is arguably the best role for them and one of the most exciting to watch. So, to spin this into a positive takeaway, there is hope for the uber talented NBA scorers. And they might be still struggling to find their role, like Bones Highland. Cole Anthony, at one point in time, it looked like he did find his role, but he had a very rough stretch, and now this season is looking rough. But in general, that six-man spot is a beacon of hope for these players because if teams just give them a chance, and so often they don't pan out because teams don't give them a chance, or they try to give them too much. They try to make them a starter when they're just not necessarily that too ready for that spot. If you just give them a little bit less of a role and allow them to come off the bench and spark an offense, you can see great things out of these players. And so while they don't always pan out, there is still beauty in the microwave score. And that is how some of the best scorers in the NBA find their niche. They find their role as that spark plug off the bench. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some of that is checking your ego, and that's why it doesn't work out for some guys. You've got to check your ego in at the door and take on a little bit less of a role. But if you are able to do so, in spite of all your limitations, you can still be a valuable NBA player if a team just gives you the opportunity. So it might not always pan out for the uber talented scorers, but if they can find their spot off the bench, it is a beauty to watch. And the nuance of the sport and all the ways that it might work out or it might not work out, that's what makes the NBA so great. That is the beauty of basketball. And that is all for today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for listening. This has been one of my favorite episodes. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. And if you've stayed up to this point, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's a couple of you watching on Spotify, thank you for making it to this point. I hope this came across pretty well and was worth your time, about 20 minutes of it. I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but I've only been doing this for a few months and I'm just trying to get into sports journalism. And this is something I really enjoy doing, and I would love to actually be able to make just a slight profit from it so I can just get better stuff and improve my content. And that just kind of comes with getting better over time because then the watch time goes up, and then all of a sudden it gets more engagement and people might sub to the channel or follow me on Spotify, and that's just huge. So if you've made it this far, all that engagement really does help. And I mean, realistically, it's never going to happen, but this would be the ideal job in a sense of something I love doing and something where I can impact a lot of other people by just trying to have more positive takeaways, because this was critical at the start, but we tried to spin it around into a positive thing. In so much media, there's not that. And I just want to uplift others and be a positive force in a world where there is so often a lack of that. And I'm only 17 right now, still a junior in high school, just trying to get better with each and every one of these. And sometimes, man, sometimes we're tired after a day of school and the episode doesn't come out too great. But other times like this, I think it comes out really well put together and we hit the nail on the head. I think we have good arguments. And I just got a new microphone. This is my second video with it. I think if you take a look at the last one about Steph Curry, I didn't even put that one on Spotify. I was not proud of it. It was more of a mic demo and kind of seeing all that it could do. but the quality of it itself, I wasn't a huge fan. But we're trying to put out the best content possible and be a positive force in media when so often that's not there, including in sports. And this is a dream. I'd love to continue to do this. But as of now, thank you for watching. This has been State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and I hope you enjoyed this.